In this video, I'm going to show you how to create a so-called 2.5D background that you can move your camera around in more freely than if you just had a simple plane like we created in the past lesson. In this lesson, I'm going to be creating the environment for a scene from my script where the main characters are arriving at the lakeside where they're going to see the fireflies emerging from the island. And for that, I'm going to try to prompt a mix of the forest path kind of ending in a beach with the mountain lake in the far background. So let's try to prompt that. Wide angle shot, so we have more freedom to move our camera later, of a path that leads to a beach. So the ground is kind of a little bit sandy with a couple rocks maybe, with a distant mountain lake. Next, gnarled pine trees frame the path on all sides. I want it to stay spooky and really constantly think about my composition. Of course, we could also use the ControlNet method from the past lesson to do this, but I've noticed in this case, prompting is actually just fine. It does this style pretty well, so I kind of want to use the AI's creativity when it comes to the composition in this case. But of course, if you want, you can utilize the ControlNet that we learned in the past lesson. In fact, when you download this workflow from the lesson, you will also see ControlNet as an option that you can turn on and off. I've just decided to leave it out from this workflow to keep it simple and really explain what we're learning in this lesson and not include a bunch of different options. Next, spooky low-key lighting. Sep figured out that this gives us that really child-friendly horror lighting that looks like it's moonlit from the top, but also has that kind of stop-motion claymation style studio look. So it's very clearly a spotlight coming from up top, which I love. And then, of course, in the style of stop motion. So that really sells it. A lot of the heavy lifting is done by this LoRa, though, too. So I strongly recommend downloading this and putting it in your workflow for the real Big Sister Firefly style that Sep has developed here. Generation settings are pretty standard for SDXL. I'm using the Mohawk model, so that's usually good with 35 steps and a CFG scale of 5. But of course, you can change that to suit your needs after some experimentation. Without further ado, let us generate 4 images. And here are the results. This is lovely. This is exactly the look I wanted. This composition is a little strange because there's this big tree in the middle. So I'm going to skip this one. That one's lovely too. A couple more paths heading to the beach. Let's check out some more. This one's nice and spooky. It has this kind of boardwalk leading to the beach. Looking very sandy, but I like the mountains in the background. This one announces the mountain range in the background. It actually could work as a different angle from the background we created in the past lesson. So I'm going to save this one here, generate some more, and check out if I get something better. Here are some more generations. What I'm looking for is something that has a distinct foreground, middle ground, and background as well, with no elements that are really going from front to back in a connected way because of the method we're going to use. So you have to imagine in the next step, we'll be cutting out slices of this. So you have these trees in the foreground, these trees in the middle ground, and a distinct background of the mountain lake itself. So on that level, it's pretty good. But if I were to choose this, which I won't because the trees are weird, I would remove this fence here because that can't be cut out into distinct slices. So we would have to model that, and I don't want to get into all that kind of manual work. So let's continue. This one again, this is more clearly what I was looking for. Without the fence. I don't like the fence, so I might put that in the negative prompt. This one is really cool. It has these individual posts, which are much more compatible. And I think I would probably remove this path of pebbles here because that would also kind of inhibit our ability to slice this up into 3 separate instances. This one is the same. This is closest to what I'm looking for. I'm going to adjust this definitely in Photoshop. This tree, for example, is pretty much the exact duplicate of this one, has a similar shape, and I don't want it there. But otherwise, it's what I'm looking for. A sandy path without any sort of fence or anything, heading toward a mysterious, dark area, which could be our lake. So let's keep working with this one. The image I like best, I'm now going to upscale with this workflow because the resolution is pretty small, 1344 by 768, And I'm going to be moving my camera around in here. So we'll only ever see a portion of it. You have to imagine I'm going to crop in here so I have that leeway to the left, right, up, and down, which means I'm going to need even more resolution to reach that ideal resolution of around full HD for a professional production. Next up, we open our generated result in Adobe Photoshop, and generative fill is going to help us a ton with this. Because like I announced, in this next step, we're going to separate this image into several separate layers, meaning this background is going to be its own thing in the very back, the mountain lake. We might even replace that with a mountain lake we created. Let's see if that works. Then this tree line here, and of course, this very foreground. What I recommend to figure out where to create these layers, where to separate this image, is to find areas that cover up a potential seam. Of course, we might have some trouble here in the path center because there's nowhere really to hide, right? If there's a split there and the layers move separately, we might be able to notice, but there are some easier spots. So all of this here, I would cut along the rocks, this stick here, because that covers up our seam nicely. Same thing on the other side. Another reason why we prompted that the gnarled trees. But before we do that, let's actually clean it up a little bit, remove some stuff we might not want. For example, this tree right here. First thing I'm going to do is actually try the intelligent object selection tool over here. So object selection, I'm just going to move this lasso over the tree and hope. That actually looks incredible. That's pretty much exactly what I wanted. I'm going to click and it's going to select almost perfectly. So to fix up that remainder, I'm going to go to the normal lasso tool and subtract from selection. So I don't want it to remove that part of this tree over here, as well as this part over here. Excellent. I'm also seeing some parts that I want to add. So this area here, this, good. And now because I don't want to cut it too close, you see this is pixel perfect. If I remove this, there's going to be a thin line of green here because it didn't get everything. I'm actually going to enlarge this by going to select, modify, expand. And I'm going to expand by, let's do 5 pixels. And you see we now have a much nicer, bigger area here. I know this is probably part of the background tree, but let's remove that nonetheless. I'm also going to add this whole little area here. So you can be super rough with this. Don't worry. You don't have to be too precise. And that looks pretty good. And of course, let's add this full area here that it forgot to select. Good. And now in generative fill, we don't actually have to enter anything optional because by default, it does tend to try and remove things. So let's just hit generate. It tried its best, but it did actually try to just generate kind of an alternate tree. So we're going to pick the one where it removed the most, and we're just going to do it again a couple times. Very good. Now it successfully removed that tree. So in this next step, we can just select all of our layers with shift click and merge layers. That's fine. Next comes the main part of the work here in Photoshop, which is actually separating this image into multiple layers. What we want to do first is decide how many layers we're actually going for. And I think we're going to go for a pretty basic foreground, middle ground, and background layer. And the reason I say that is because I can immediately recognize where some good seams would be. Because these layers will be pretty flat in Blender, I'm going to be looking for spots where you can't really tell that they're 2D layers, meaning that this whole foreground with the tree, these branches, the rock here, up until the path is actually a very decent, easily cut out seam. Same thing on the other side, which is one of the reasons we actually prompted the gnarled trees to frame the path like this. So we might have some trouble with the path, but let's solve that problem when we get to it. Because right behind it is a decent middle ground. I would actually select all of this, possibly with this background tree here, actually, everything up to the beach itself as my middle ground. And then finally, the background, of course, is everything that's in the shadows here. Because we're going to separate this into roughly 3 layers, I'm going to duplicate my layer 3 times. So I have one final backup as well. So we just go over here, duplicate, and let's name this one foreground. Duplicate again. Call this one middle ground. and duplicate one final time. Call this one background. That way we have a rough sorting already. And this final one, I'm just going to call backup and lock and hide it, just so we have something to fall back on in case something goes horribly wrong. Next, of course, you have to make sure to actually save this project as a Photoshop file. So let's do that quickly before doing anything else. Excellent. And now we're going to start by creating the background. So for that, we hide the middle ground and foreground. And here's where I'm going to show you a neat trick. You saw earlier when we removed this tree here that it kept trying to put different uglier trees in its place. And that's because generative fill does actually like a bit of reference when removing things. So instead of selecting this and just kind of hoping that it removes all of the land and leaves our lake with the mountains, I'm actually going to give it a bit of a leg up. So for that, I'm going to take my normal paintbrush, give it a nice big size, and keep the hardness low so it stays nice and soft. And now I'm going to select one of the colors. So for example, this area here. And I'm just going to make a new layer over the background and paint this color over here, over everything that's roughly on the same height in this area here. So here we can go a little bit higher, I think. And once we get a little bit higher, I can pick a new color. So it's a little darker over here. So I'm going to take this eyedropper with I, and with B, go back to my brush. Just be careful to not paint a lot into the areas that are already generated, because they look nice and we don't want to replace them with bad sketches that we're doing here. Good. And for this whole bottom part, I mean, it's not going to be visible anyway, so I'm just going to select most of it all the way here. And then with the paint bucket tool, which is G, just fill it up. And now you see we have a rough reference for generative fill to work with, which will make it much easier. In the next step, we're going to select the areas that are still real, so that are still prompted, just roughly. Select inverse, and now we hit generative fill. And we can leave the prompt and just see what happens. Very good. So it understood that there are mountains here. So this whole area is decent. There's kind of a beachy area here, some more mountains. This tree is a little messed up. The other options are worse though. So I'm going to stick with number one. You can see up here there might be some strange details, but honestly, they could also be clouds. So until we've cut out the middle ground and foreground and see how much of this is actually visible, I'm going to stick with this result for now. Now in the next step, because these are still separate layers, I'm going to select all of them and then make a folder, a group, and call that background. So in case we need to edit anything, we haven't merged them quite yet. And next up is actually not the middle ground, but the foreground. So we're going to hide the background and show the foreground. And the reason is because once we have the foreground selected, we actually have a perfect cutout that we can then use to generative fill the background. And you'll see what I mean in just a moment. So in the foreground, we are going to just go nuts with the object selection tool, for example. So something like that, we can shift and just click all of the objects in the foreground that we want. Many of them have already been kind of pre-selected intelligently, so you can just kind of hover over them and see which ones they are. That stick, this one, this rock here. It's very, very easy with these amazing tools from Adobe. Not an ad. I'm just a fan sometimes of them. Very good. So that's already a good selection. And now once you have the ones that are kind of automatically selected, you can actually right click and then go to select and mask. And I just have some kind of default settings that I use here to make it a little better, improve the edges here. So the radius I usually set to 5 and the contrast can go up. And occasionally shift edge can actually go down a little bit in case it caught a little too much. In this case, I think it's pretty good though. So I'm going to go to maybe, yeah, pretty much like that. So, okay, very good. And now you can just duplicate this again. Doesn't matter what you name it, and hit this mask button. So at least you know you have these already separated. For this next task, I recommend the magnetic lasso tool, which is an option here in the lasso menu. So magnetic lasso tool, and this is just kind of a lasso that thinks a little bit about what edge you're trying to select. So it guesses a decent path forward. Now I'm thinking this rock here is staying in the middle ground, so I'm going to pass it by and get this little hill outcropping here. Of course, the rock is already part of it. We've already selected that. Down here, I'm going to go around. The path is its own animal, like the actual sand path, so I'm going to leave that alone for now. And just on occasion, finish your selection here, bring it back around. Go into this mask here, select the paint bucket tool, make sure it's white, and fill it, because that makes it selected. So that's a pretty neat little trick. You'll see these edges are not perfect because of the magnetic lasso tool, but we'll fix those later. Same thing on the other side. Very good. And now next, to better preview or better control what you're selecting, you can actually hide the main foreground layer and right-click into this mask and hit Select and Mask, and you'll see the parts that you don't currently have in your selection kind of grayed out and transparent in the background. And with these brushes up here, which you can change the size of, you can actually just add to your selection very roughly, which is what we're going to do now. So you can zoom into the parts that were missed or that you didn't get manually, and just slowly and carefully paint them in like this. And it'll kind of help you. It'll adjust and guess what you're trying to do. Is very helpful. So over here, for example, all of this stuff. And with softer stuff like this grass here, it's really a valuable tool because it notices that it should be a softer selection. That's too much, and you can always do minus as well. So it's intelligent both ways. And again, don't get too much into the details because this is going to be in Blender anyway. There's going to be moving camera and motion blur and all sorts of goodies that will distract your audience. And as a final suggestion, you can of course paint directly into this mask with your paintbrush. So if you have a very soft paintbrush, you can also make sure it's black and just kind of slowly go over some areas that you might want a little bit softer without the intelligent features that might also make mistakes sometimes. Same with white. So up here, for example, you're missing part of the branch. That's fine. You can just adjust that manually by painting into it. For the path, we're going to have to see what it looks like in Blender later. But for now, I'm going to try to make a soft transition. So just using that brush technique with a soft brush, I'm just going to make sure that that transition here is very, very soft and smooth. So we can't really see it unless we look directly at it. Very good. So you see, I kind of use this foreground layer as more of a reference. So we can delete that for now and just use this one as the foreground. And now is kind of the cool trick for the middle ground, because we have this foreground mask and we can right click it and click Add Mask to Selection. Then we show the middle ground, go to Select, Modify, Expand it by 5 pixels. And now we can just generative fill on top of this and see what happens as a first step. And you see it almost perfectly removed our entire foreground. Gave us a couple different options. And this one has kind of the spooky lighting of the original, so I really like that. And I don't think we have to actually adjust that much, because if we show the foreground and take this transform tool, we can already kind of get a little preview of what it's going to move like in Blender. And you can see there's a distinct layer that works pretty well. And I actually think even the path is not going to be much of a problem, you can see. Very, very cool. One thing I noticed here is some details. There's still some sand here. So now you can use this chance to paint away some more of these details and really fix it up nice. To separate the middle ground from the background, we're going to use all the techniques we learned. That looks roughly okay. And so we can right click on Select and Mask again, set the radius to 5, contrast pretty high, Shift Edge again. And I'm just going to add some of these tree details back in. And remember, we're working on the middle ground, so there will be foreground on top of this. That's going to hide a lot of the details here. And now you'll see they fit together nicely, but they're all separate. So you can move the foreground around, move the middle ground in front of the background. And these are the lovely layers that we're now going to bring into Blender. While Blender can import Photoshop files, it can't do separate layers. So that feature unfortunately won't really help us with this specific file. So I'm going to take a shortcut and just export the layers individually as high quality PNGs. So let's start with the background. I'm going to hide middle ground and foreground and just export it normally with the quick export as PNG. Next, the middle ground, then the foreground. I'm also going to export one PNG with all of my layers just for reference and to figure out the camera angle for Blender. Because we want to set up our 2D layers in a 3D environment, we do want them to have the correct size and the camera to have the correct settings that it would have had we actually shot our scene in a real stop motion set. So this is where fspy comes in. You can download it at fspy.io, and it's an open source so-called still image camera matching tool. And you need to download both the actual app, so click this download button in a new tab, and download this setup.exe if you're on Windows, as well as the practical official fspy importer for Blender, which will make our job much easier. So also click here. And download the latest version, which should be this zip file. The first thing we do is open the setup.exe, and it'll automatically install and open. And we can just drag our image in here. Now it's going to look a little bit scary, but in effect, what we have to do is just align these axes as they would look in our scene. This is a lot easier, to be honest, with architectural photos or generations because there are much more parallel lines, but we will make do in this scene as well. So what I begin with is actually moving this origin point to kind of the center of the scene that I also want to have be the center in Blender. So I'm going to put it here. And now we're going to create the x-axis. So for that, we're going to find two roughly identical length lines on the ground here, like, for example, this point here, and I'm going to align it kind of to the path. And the point across the way, if we assume that the path is the same length. Something like that. And the same we're going to do with this y-axis. So let's pick this spot here, and further down the way, a spot with equal length. Something like this. And now we're also going to add from third vanishing point, which will also give us a z-axis. And this we can use on a tree, for example. So this tree up to this point is probably about the same height as this tree to this point. If you adjust your points and you end up in a space like this where you can't actually see your axes here in the center on your origin point, you might have an error message like this: invalid vanishing point configuration. And that's because it can't actually make sense of your scene the way you've set up your axes, which even if you feel like they make sense, they might not, because it is an AI generated image that doesn't really have a sense of perspective. It's just pretending to. And so you might have to adjust your axes in such a way that they do snap into place like this for it all to make sense. So just keep trying. What's actually bothering me currently is that the x-axis seems a little short. It seems like it's not understanding that it's going this way for quite a while. So I'm going to keep adjusting and seeing if I can find some better points to do this with. I can almost see that the vanishing point is making sense because it's on the horizon like that. So I think I'm going to be sufficiently happy with this. Next up here on the left is a reference distance that you need to set for your Blender project. So I'm going to click here and select, let's do along the y-axis. And what we need to do here is enter the length of the y-axis. And I'm thinking could be about 2.5 meters. Let's do around, well, we can't do decimals, so let's just enter 2 meters. If it doesn't say meters, make sure it does, because Blender works with a main unit of meters. And now we can go to File and Save. And now we move on to Blender. The first thing we do is install the add-on. For that, we go to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, Install from Disk. Go to your downloads and just select the zip file you downloaded. It'll automatically install and activate, but if it doesn't, make sure that checkbox is clicked. And now over here in File, Import, you'll find a new FSpy feature. So click that and import the FSpy project you just saved. And it's going to automatically import the image you gave FSpy as a background image and create a new camera with automatic settings. And you'll see this, it recognized a field of view of 112 degrees in the camera, which translates to 12 millimeters, which is an extremely wide lens. I suppose we prompted wide angles, so I'm not surprised. So what was all that about? Well, you can see that instead of us having to manually figure out all these settings, it already positioned this scene in a way that it fits into the Blender viewport. The vanishing point goes all the way to the horizon, the x-axis here, and if we create a new plane, for example, it'll go straight to that origin point we set, and we can move it along the path. And the perspective actually makes sense. So as another demo, let's create the monkey. Really imagine a character in the scenario here. And the size actually works perfectly. So that's the great advantage of FSpy. Now that this is ready, it's time to import our layers. And for that, we just need to hit Shift-A, Image, Mesh Plane. Navigate to the folder with your layers, and you can select background, foreground, and middle ground. Over here, you can leave the material shader on principled because we do want it to be influenced by light. But for example, if you've seen our project Space Vets, those shaders are emission shaders because we didn't want light to affect them. So if you're working on that kind of project, click emission. Down here, there are also more options. Alpha, we want to have imported, straight, perfect. Now click Import Images as Planes. Once you've downloaded them, you'll see that they're actually really small and you can't see their colors. So that's the second part of that is of course that we have solid mode on. So to fix that, we go to Material Preview or possibly even Rendered mode. Let's stick with Material Preview. And then step by step, we will change their size. So what I like to pay attention to when making a Blender project is that everything is roughly life size. So we don't have problems importing different characters and different props and that sort of thing. So for that reason, I'm going to first select this background plane here, hit N for the N panel, go to Item, and down here in the dimensions, we see that it's under 2 meters wide. But of course, this is this entire mountain range in the background, so it needs to be much, 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 much bigger. Maybe not life size, because it doesn't need to be that far away. So let's do something like 70 meters wide. Now you'll see, because the camera is crooked, because that's what FSpy did, this is not aligning perfectly to our camera angle. But we want it to, right? Because the background picture is angled that way. So for that, we're going to, instead of trying to manipulate this manually like that, we're going to activate another add-on that's already pre-installed. So for that, we go to Edit, Preferences, and Copy Attributes menu. So we turn that on. Down here, make sure to save preferences. Autosave doesn't work always. And now, when we select this and Shift, select our camera, we can now hit F3, Copy Attributes, Copy Rotation. And it will automatically align to the rotation of our camera. Let's do that same thing with the middle ground and the foreground. So middle ground, select the camera, search, copy rotation. Foreground, Shift, camera, copy rotation. So now they're all rotated correctly. But before we start aligning them perfectly, I actually want to bring this background picture to the forefront so we can actually see it. And for that, I select the camera by itself, go to the Data Properties, Background Images, and select Depth Front. So that way it'll always be in front. And I'm going to turn down the opacity a little bit so we can actually still see through. Great. So now we can slowly but surely align this. to the background. We don't have to be perfect, but just so it fits. We rotate outside, you'll see this is pretty far away from the camera, so I think we'll have plenty of space to put the middle ground and the foreground here as well. And now, to make our lives a little bit easier, I'm going to show you another trick. So for this, we're going to select our middle ground, which is teeny tiny, Shift, background, and then copy attributes, scale, and copy attributes, location. So it's already roughly in the same place. Same thing with the foreground. And now we're going to move these along the x-axis a little bit so we can at least roughly see them. Now from the camera perspective, it's looking pretty close to our original image. Of course, the middle ground and foreground are now way too big, but instead of, roughly resizing them and then bringing them closer to the camera and kind of hoping that they're the right size, I learned this following trick from Ian Hubert, who's an incredible Blender artist on YouTube and Patreon. And he says to select the camera, Shift S, move your cursor to selected, then choose the foreground, for example, Object, Set Origin, Origin to 3D Cursor. And now when we resize, all that happens is that it moves closer to the camera while resizing, meaning that from the perspective of the camera, it's actually not going to change at all, which is perfect because we've already aligned it roughly, correct? And it only brings it closer to the camera. So now we can actually watch the dimensions and make sure those are correct. So I'm thinking this whole thing across is maybe 10 meters. Let's do 12 meters and just see where that takes us. Perfect. Remember to apply, Control A, apply scale, and then middle ground as well. So Object, Set Origin, Origin to 3D Cursor. Now we can scale it down and put it roughly in the background. So this is, I think, 20 meters, 25 meters is very good. So that's how we set up this little 2.5D diorama that we have. Now, if we switch to the camera, we'll see that actually there's this weird haze up here. So that's one final thing we need to change, namely it's part of the principled BSD-F shader. So we go to Shading tab and select the background first and make sure the roughness is very high. Let's change it to 1 first. Same thing with the foreground and the middle ground. So that's much, much better. And now, one final thing, we can go to the camera and actually turn off the background image because we now have our setup. If we want, we can also turn up this Passepartout on this camera as well. And now immediately you will see that our camera can actually change the perspective. We have this nice little 3D effect going on. And what I predicted, the path, you can tell it's separate layers. I think it's actually pretty decent though. We can make it a little better though. So that's what I'm going to do next. One method of adding a little bit of depth to these layers is actually creating a depth map by using a ControlNet preprocessor, for example. But while I've actually done this, for example, in the backgrounds on the Storybook Studios website, I found it can be actually quite difficult to get the edges correct because they will be warped and you might be able to see kind of jagged edges. You'll see the resolution of the 3D models. Instead, for a background like this, I'm going to do something much more simple using Blender's built-in tools. So for the middle ground, I'm going to try to bring this path closer to the one in the foreground by hitting Tab to enter edit mode and then Control R. This will give us this little line here. If you click, you can actually move it down. I think I'm a little low. And don't worry about it if you're too low. You can actually just hit GG and then slide it back up like that until it looks good to you. And I'm going to put it up here so we can move this entire portion down here closer to the front. And to do so, you just need to select these bottom vertices here with Shift. And now we are going to change this setting up here. So usually the pivot point is between just kind of the center of what you have selected. So if we hit scale, it's going to scale towards each other. We don't want that in this case. We want to actually scale this towards the camera so we don't see much warping in our camera image. And for that, we change it to 3D cursor because we still have a cursor on the camera. So now if we scale, it's going to move up toward the camera. And we'll see the effect by going into the camera. It's going to warp a little bit, but not as much as we think. So that way, we're actually tricking the perspective a teeny bit. Now, you see it did actually warp. And the reason for that is just the resolution. So if you want to fix that warp, you can just add another loop like this. If you click, you'll see it'll warp right back. If you still don't like what it looks like, you can just keep adding them and it'll fix that step by step. And now if we go into the camera, you can actually see by moving it, it's no longer that much of an issue. And if you want to make this effect even better, you can of course do the same to this one. So go into edit mode, Control R, move it to the top of that path piece, select these vertices, and scale them up to the camera. Kind of make a little bit of a floor here. Don't overdo it, because it's still a trick, but it's still very effective. And if you want to add multiple of these loops at a time, you can Control R and then use the scroll wheel to add a couple of them. So I'm going to do 3 at a time to fix that warping. We overdid it a little bit here, so just select those points again. And you can also manually adjust them, just that tiny bit. Now you'll see it's much more three-dimensional than it was. At this point, though, you might actually recognize the breaks in this because, of course, you look at it in solid mode, there's just a fold in there. And to fix that, we're going to select the ones affected, right-click, and click Shade Smooth. And then boom, it's no longer a problem. Of course, what we need to do, and the reason we created this original image in such a large resolution, is to move the camera in a little bit so we'd never hit the edges and leave our image. And as one final step, I'm actually going to do the same with the background, because this lake, of course, should start right at the shoreline and not in the far background. Next up, the lighting. Because we've created this scene using Material Preview, we don't actually have an accurate image of what the final render will look like. So if we switch into rendered view, you'll see it's actually really dark because we barely have any lights in our scene. In fact, there's only one tiny one in the far distance here. So to redo that, we can delete that one lamp and move our cursor back to the world origin, which is right here. And now with Shift A, we can add a light to see what that actually looks like. And now we want to move this point way further here, so we actually have it in our scene. And you'll see, because we have the principal BSDF, the scene will actually react to our light, which is kind of cool. Except here on this little transition. Because the scene is quite large, though, we're going to want to increase this light if we want to have a real effect on it. Great. But what if we want to increase the entire lighting of the scene? Because obviously this is much darker than what we originally prompted. Well, for that, we go into the Shading tab, make sure Rendered mode is on, and down here in Shader Type World, we can affect our background. Right now, it's this kind of neutral gray, which is lighting the scene a little bit. If we change it to black, for example, you'll see that it's doing something, but it's not really lighting nearly enough. If we change it to pure white, that's also too much. So by both adjusting the color and the strength of the color, we can light the entire world how we like. One final thing I'd like to show you is, of course, we already kind of have this blurry effect in the scene, but that's not authentic, that's not real, because this was already in the generated image. Of course, in Blender, we can change that and have it render an actual depth of field as well, as I've already shown you. So make sure you have your new camera selected, click depth of field, and adjust the f-stop to something much lower, like 0.4, for example. And then you can either create a focus object like I showed you, or just pick the focus distance. Now you have a really nice little miniature look like this. I hope this lesson was helpful and you have a ton of fun making these really cool little 2.5D scenes. Enjoy, and I'll see you in the near future. In this course, we're showing you a couple different ways to get high quality textures from your AI generated 3D models. But what if the absolute worst case is happening? So you're using an old AI model like TrypoSR to create your OBJ, and the textures look really bad. If you bring it into Blender and show the textures, it's not even showing textures. If you look at it in Comfy, it's really, really bad. And you're not using your own local GPU, so a tool like Stable Projector Z won't be an option for you. What can you possibly do to get a higher quality result out of your textures? Well, do not fear. I'm going to show you how to do so in Blender. The first thing we need to do is, of course, actually get your textures onto here, because all you got out of ComfyUI was an OBJ file. So what does that even mean? There's no image there at all. So the way TrypoSR saves textures is in something called vertex colors. So basically, it doesn't save the texture as an image, but rather as a vertex. It saves literally the colors in the mesh data itself. And the way we can show that in Blender is actually go into the shading tab and create a new material for this model. So I've already introduced you to some of these nodes, and what we're going to do is actually delete the principled BSDF node, hit Shift A and search for emission as usual. And now we are going to search for color attribute node, and this connected into the emission color will show us these vertex colors. Now you really see the resolution is not too great. We're going to get an image out of these colors using a process called baking. Now, I do have to warn you, this is complicated. This is deep level Blender stuff, and I strongly, strongly recommend you check out the other lessons. Use a higher quality 3D generating AI to get your model. Something like Rodin will give you textures that are very high quality anyway. If you want to stay in the free space, use one of the Hugging Face spaces with a newer open source creation tool that gives you better textures. And if you possibly can, use someone else's high quality GPU to get Stable Projector Z running. If you still don't want to do that or can't, this is going to use a lot of your time that might be spent better being creative, but I'm nonetheless going to show you this solution if all else fails. But it will take work. There's no ifs and buts about it. So how do we do this so-called baking? Well, what you need to do is hit Shift A and look for an image texture node, then click new, and let's go to a higher resolution. So 2048 by 2048. Call this something like Mira Diffuse Bake, something like that. And this will generate a new black image. You can look at it here. It's just black currently. And what we're going to do is actually bring these vertex colors into this texture so we have an image to work with. So the next step to do so is actually creating a so-called UV map for this. This will come out of a tool like Rodin, which is another reason I would recommend this for you. But what you need to do is tab into edit mode, hit A, get all these vertex selected, and then go to UV, Smart UV Project. Set the angle limit to something a little higher than that. Let's do 90 degrees. Island margin should be at 0.01. And let's just hit unwrap, see what happens. And in UV editing, you'll see that these are all so-called UV islands. So it's basically split this 3D object into a bunch of different smaller 2D islands, which of course can be represented in a 2D texture as opposed to a 3D model. And now we can connect our image texture to a UV map node, select our UV map here, and now this is ready to bake the emission colors. Now over here, we go to render, change the render engine to cycles, and now down here, a new tab will appear. This is the baking tab, and we're going to change the bake type to emit. So we get the color information that's currently going into emission. Make sure this is selected as a texture, and we hit bake. And now you see down here, if we scale this up a little bit, that it has now saved all of these emission colors in the diffuse bake texture that we selected. Now make sure you save this image. So go up here, image, save as, save it in the place of your choice. Very good. And now we can plug this into emission, and you'll see it's pretty much correct. There might be some errors still though. Good, now we have a PNG texture to work with. And now what we're going to do is bring in our original texture and project it onto this, because of course our original texture has the maximum quality. It's the OG concept art we created for our character of Mira, so it's going to be exactly what we envisioned. Now the way we do that is we hit Shift A, image texture, and we open that original image. The original image that you generated with the character turnaround, because in this image, you have a couple of different angles, which will be helpful. What we're basically going to be doing is we're going to project the front of this texture onto the front and the kind of semi-back onto the back and sides, and see if that helps us at all improve this quality. So what does projection mean? Well, projection means that if I Shift A and create an empty, a single arrow, and rotate that on the y-axis by -90 degrees, we will be kind of shooting this texture onto the front of our model. So how do we do that? Well, we select our character, go to modifiers, search for UV project, and create a new UV map. So we create a new UV map over here, click plus, and call that projection. And then in the modifier, we select that as the UV map and select the arrow. Let's rename it projector so we stay clean here. Go to the modifier and select the projector as the object. And now we need to tell our UV, our image texture, that it needs to follow the UV projection. Now we connect this to emission. You'll see it's wrong, of course, because it doesn't know how to project correctly yet. And by selecting this arrow, rotating it, you can actually start adjusting the projection with the normal tools that I've showed you. So in this case, I'm going to go by the head mostly. Just size it up a little bit so it makes sure it's in there. Now, unfortunately, we don't have the T-pose in there, but that's absolutely no problem. We can fix that later. What's important is that most of the rest works well. So we can also tab into edit here, make sure X-ray is on, and move these around, these vertices, so they match the original image more. Very good. And now if we rotate, you can see, it's not perfect, but like I said, this is really more of an emergency situation to follow this lesson. So it's not going to be as pretty than other methods. But how do we fix this back here? Well, by actually applying this modifier. So click over here, hit apply, and now going into UV editing. You'll see if you select all your vertices, this is what you'll get. And this is actually the moment where we can fix our arm problem with the T-pose here. So just make sure you have proportional editing on, which means you won't just be moving these vertices, but a couple of them that are affected around them. Just with the scroll wheel, you can adjust how many are affected. And we're going to actually select with C the whole arm. Turn down proportional editing a little bit, and then just move this down carefully. It's not going to be pretty. Just put it where the arm is. You can also adjust a little bit. Now we do the other arm. Proportional editing, you can also do connected only, so it won't other vertices like the hair like we just had. Okay. Well, that's as good as we're going to get it. And now what we need to do is actually select the back. So maybe we're going to go from the top actually and only really get those parts of the back that don't look good, like the face, right? And let's turn off X-ray in this case so we can't accidentally select vertices in the front, and select only those parts that we really want to adjust. So that's about right. Okay, and now over here, we can select everything with A and actually just move it over to roughly the back of the character. Now we just kind of quickly and dirtily make sure it stays within the lines. That's how we kind of have something of a texture in the front and the back. Now, of course, it's not perfect. It's not going to be perfect unless you get something like Stable Projector Z, but you can try and be a little more precise with your creation here. Okay, that's how you get slightly higher quality in your Tripo SR models. Of course, this is not perfect, but I also created another lesson for you called texture fixing in Blender, which is not just useful for when you have a higher quality model, but also for fixing up some of those egregious errors that this method causes. So if you have a little bit of painting talent, you can actually go in and improve that texture manually. You're not stuck with this result.
Hi everyone, welcome to this lesson on how to rig characters in Blender using two powerful tools, AutoRig Pro and AccuRig. Rigging can be a complex process, but these tools simplify it significantly, allowing you to bring your 3D characters to life with ease. In the first part, we will explore how to use AutoRig Pro's Smart feature to rig a character in Blender quickly. And in the second part, we will dive into AccuRig to achieve similar results, so let's get started. What is AutoRig Pro? AutoRig Pro is an advanced rigging add-on for Blender that streamlines the rigging process for bipedal, quadrupedal, and even custom characters. The Smart feature allows for automatic placement of rig components and significantly reducing the setup time. So for using AutoRig Pro, first head to the blendermarket.com/product/AutoRig Pro website, and here are several purchase options. After you purchased, you can start Blender, and you will get a zip file and head to your preferences, add-ons, and here install from disk. And in your downloads folder, you will find different zip files that you have to install to make the add-on available in Blender. So once that is done, you can press N and you will see a new tab right here called ARP, AutoRig Pro. And this is what we're going to use in our next step. So the next step would be to load in your character. We have to prepare our character model, and we have to ensure our character is either in a T-pose or in a pose for optimal results. If we press N and our character is selected, we can see that our scale is not entirely correct and our rotation either. To fix this, press Ctrl A and apply all transforms. And now you see our scale is resetted and everything is back in order. In the 3D view, we switch to Object Mode if you're not in Object Mode. And on the right hand side, as I said earlier, you find the tab AutoRig Pro. If it's not visible, press the N tab to make it visible. So first we're going to select our character mesh and we scroll down to the panel called Smart. And with our character selected, we click Get Select Objects and the full body or facial only, but we want to rig our full body and we press OK. Now you see that Blender switched to a front view to start our rigging process. To start the process, we're going to click on Add Neck and you will see this little circle right here that will represent the position of our neck. You can only go up and down on the Z-axis, so make sure your character is centered. And we simply find our position and click. And next we're gonna add our chin. And after that, we're going to add our shoulders. And you see that Autorig Pro automatically gives us a symmetrical view for our shoulders. Here we lock in our shoulders and then our wrists, the spine root, and the ankles of our character. Once our markers are placed, we go to the bottom here and click Go inside the Smart Feature panel. And once we pressed Go, Autorig Pro will generate a preliminary rig based on your markers. If necessary, switch to the Edit mode to edit different bones and the bone placement if it's needed. But for now, it looks quite good. So we return back to Object mode. In the next step, we're gonna click Match to Rig. And now we have these controls that popped up for our character. And after that, we're gonna go to our skinning rig, select our model, and press Bind. Now, after the binding process is completed, we can switch to pose mode and actually go back into a normal perspective. Now we select the controller, press G to move the controller to check if the deformations of our rig work as we wanted to, and this looks quite good. By pressing escape, it goes back to the original pose. And I'd say that looks really, really nice, and it was really fast to set up. And now you've successfully rigged your character using Autorig Pro's Smart Feature. This powerful tool accelerates the rigging process and allowing you to focus on animation and creativity. So in the next step, I'm going to show you a different way. If you don't want to buy Autorig Pro, you can use an alternative called AccuRig. But AccuRig doesn't come with all these controllers that you see here that come in quite handy while animating. For rigging our character, we're gonna use AccuRig. AccuRig is completely free and you can download it for free on the actorcorereallusion.com website. And once installed and loaded up, you will face this interface right here. And we can simply click in here, load in our FBX file or OBJ file that we either created with Rodin or with ComfyUI. And here we see our character and we click Force Symmetry. So you will see in a bit, click Rig Character. And this will take a while. And now you see our control points are already in place. And when you hover over a certain point, you see where it's supposed to sit on your character. We can drag the shoulders a little bit further down. And maybe we click front part here because it's thinking the middle of the character, because of the hoodie or backpack, is part of the entire body. We can click on front part. Put it right there, a little bit more here. Oh, now it's switched over. I think that looks good for now. If we go back to whole mesh, hover over feet and check the ankle. The ankle could be a little bit higher. And our knees a little bit lower. And that's looking good for now. Maybe the elbow. Just the elbow a little bit. And now we press on click hands. Before you do that, check how many fingers your character has, because that is important. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fingers. Here you can select the number of fingers you have, and we simply press on next. Now that came out a little bit messed up, but we're gonna bring back the order because our hand is not the best hand model. We have to adjust a couple of things. So here you can select if you just want to move the selected controller or the entire hierarchy. So it's our second finger. And the thumb will be right here. Usually it works much better if your hand is has a better geometry. This one right here. This one right here. That's the tip of the thumb. And selecting this controller, you have the direction your thumb is lined up. So it will be kind of like this. Then we can go back to hierarchy. Switch to selected. That will be our pinky. And I think that's looking good so far. As we have force territory selected at the beginning, it will adjust the right hand accordingly. So now we can press finalize character. And here we have already a basic movement of our character. Switch to an A pose, we can click on acting and see like a walk cycle. And that looks good to me. If you need to do any adjustments or your arms will stuck inside of your body, you can click here on the controllers and click mirror. And you can change the angle of how the arms behave and always reset if you need to. So select an A pose and we click on export, export FBX and select Blender from the drop-down menu. Click on export and I already have a file here called Mira Base Rig blend.fbx. Save it. And in the next lesson, we will learn how to use our rigged characters for basic blocking our scenes that we created in our storyboard. Hi everyone, welcome to this tutorial on the basics of blocking scenes in Blender. And blocking is an essential step in this 3D animation and filmmaking process. So it helps you to lay out the basic composition, timing, and positioning of the objects and characters in your scene before diving into a more detailed animation. By the end of this lesson, you will have a solid understanding of how to block scenes in Blender and setting a strong foundation for your 3D project. So let's get started. Before we dive into Blender, let's briefly discuss what blocking is. Blocking is the process of creating a more rough representation of your scene using simple backgrounds and placeholders, and it's like sketching the basic layout before adding details. It's one step further from our storyboard that we created earlier. So this helps in planning camera angles and composition, establishing the basic poses for characters, and visualizing the overall scene flow. Most important, identifying potential issues early on. Think of blocking as blueprint of your animation or scene. So for this example, I chose those two scenes because in this part, we're gonna set up our cameras for dialogue scenes in Blender, and we focus on the importance of focal length and how it influences the composition and storytelling in dialogue sequences. And we will explore more understanding about focal length and its impact on your shots, setting up cameras for dialogue and including framing and positioning. And most important, applying the 180-degree rule and shot reverse shot technique and practical steps in Blender to achieve cinematic dialogue scenes. So in Blender, I already have our two rigged characters, Myra and our mummy. And to have a little bit more cleaned up scene, I added a new collection called character and imported my two character rigs from the earlier lesson. To get a little bit more feeling for our scene, we're gonna press Shift A and go to Mesh and create a plane, and gonna rotate this plane by 90 degrees. Press N here to have the correct transform. And we want to adjust the scale to a 16:9 ratio and put the scale a little bit down by pressing S. And this will be a placeholder for our environment. So move it a little bit back by pressing G and Y. And click. And now we're going to create a material for it. So go to shading. First, what I forgot, I wanted to have my scene clean. I made another collection called environment, and we're going to drag our plane into the environment collection. Now we're going to press new, and we have a new material for our plane, and press Shift A. We will add an image texture and open our environment image texture for this lesson, and go to base color. And also what I want to do is put it in to emission and put the strength value to 0 and the roughness to 1 and the roughness also to 1. Now you already see our background placeholder. We can move it a little bit up by pressing G and Z. And that's basically it for setting up our 3 assets for blocking our first shot. So I'm not going to focus on the mummy for now and disable it. And I will set up a new collection called cameras. And with the collection selected, we're going to press Shift A and add a camera to our scene. Now, if you press N again to minimize this transform window, we're going to press 0 on our numpad and we will be in our camera. Now, if you move right now, you will see that you are not actually in your camera anymore. So press 0 again, press N and go to view and checkbox this little field right here. And now if I zoom out, or rotate, you will see that we are still inside of our camera. What we also want to activate for this lesson is the depth of field. When you click down here in our camera button and select our character as focus object. So let's go back and take a look at our shot list. And this is almost like a medium shot or close-up. So first, let's understand what focal length is and why it's crucial in cinematography. What is focal length? Focal length is the distance between the lens and the camera's sensor when the subject is in focus, measured in millimeters. So what kind of impact does that have on our images? The field of view, or short FOV, determines how much of the scene is captured. For example, wide-angle lenses have short focal length and capture a broader view, while telephoto lenses, or long focal length, capture a narrow view. So the depth of field, or short DOF, influences how much of the image is in focus. So a short focal length means greater depth of field, while long focal length means a shallower depth of field. Wide-angle lenses, on one hand, exaggerate distances, but can distort, for example, facial features, while a telephoto lens or a long lens compresses distances and flattens features. What lenses do we choose for dialogue scenes? The most preferred lenses for dialogue scenes are 35 to 85 millimeter lenses. The 50mm lens is often considered the closest to human eye perspective and provides a natural look without distortion. A wide-angle lens, for example a 24mm to 35mm, creates a sense of space at the environment and can introduce distortion. It is not ideal for close-ups. It is more for shots where you want to create suspense, for example. The telephoto lens from 85mm to 135mm and up isolates the subject from the background, gives a shallow depth of field, and is great for emotional close-ups and compresses the facial features. Right now, for our short film, we have a special look because we want to have a style of stop motion, or miniature style. So we're going to choose a much larger focal length. In this example, we're going to choose like a 100mm long focal length. And we're going to take our entire character and move it up a little bit off to the Z-axis and go in a little bit further. And then we select our rig and switch to pose mode and start posing our character. Go back to our camera view. And I want to tilt the angle a little bit more to this side. And this is going to be OT. Camera sort of like one. So just for demonstration purposes, I'm gonna select our plane here and copy and paste. Now we have a duplicate of our plane. Gonna go back to object mode, select our plane and drag it over here. And we're gonna go into our character collection, activate our mummy again. Place it right here. Rotate around that. Move it over here. And we want to create another camera. Go to camera. Call it camera 2. Jump into the view. Camera to viewport. And as our camera 1, we're going to change to 100mm lens. We want to enable depth of field, select our mummy, drag our camera over here. So let's talk about the 180-degree rule. Once this is set up, if we go in a top view, a guideline in cinematography that maintains spatial relationships between characters on the screen is the 180-degree rule. So imagine a line that is connecting these two characters. All cameras should stay on one side of this line, like our cameras we see right here. This prevents disorientation and keeps the screen direction consistent. Breaking this rule can be done intentionally for a dramatic effect, but should be used really, really carefully. Because if you go back to our camera view in this camera and we have this camera, if this camera would, for example, be crossing this axis, it would be more on this side. So now if we go into the top view, you can see in the middle axis, both cameras are now on the opposite side. And if we switch back to our camera view and switch between these cameras, it looks like both characters are looking in the same direction. And we don't want that because they should interact with each other. So let's jump out and redo this. Bring back our camera to our original position. And now we are back in the camera view. And you see it looks like they're looking at each other and not in the same direction anymore. And this is how we go through like all shots that we have in our shot list. And once this is done, we will export the shots and replace them in our animatic that we did in an earlier lesson.
Sebastian now has the environments and the characters and has already blocked them roughly the way we want to have them in the final animation. So now it's time for a second animatic where we can see even more closely how our end result is going to be. To do that, I am actually going to go into our Premiere project and duplicate our original animatic edit file, just in case, so we can more easily go back in case anything goes wrong. So I'm going to go to duplicate, and then I'm going to rename this copy to 2. Let's open that up, and of course it's going to look identical. Now, much like we made our storyboard images folder, I'm now going to make a new folder I'm going to call rendered stills. And into this folder, I'm going to drag the stills that Sep has already prepared for me. So they're named just like the originals, except with still somewhere in their name, just to help with the structure. And they're already in the same order and otherwise labeled exactly as their counterparts. Now, instead of replacing the ones I already have in the animatic, I'm actually going to put them on a new layer just to keep that order going. And that way I can always go back and compare, make different versions. I'm going to go ahead and place these new images with the same timing as the previous ones. And do make sure that if you have something on that layer already, to rescue it onto a new layer. We don't want to replace anything by accident. And now you can see you don't have to adjust the transformation or anything of these new images because we already set our Premiere file up originally in the correct resolution. So we're saving a lot of time here in all future steps. And here, of course, we may want to silence this upper layer if we have any writing or something like that up top. And since these are stills, again, don't forget to re-add the animations that you had on the previous stills. So if you had a little pull out here, just feel free to copy from the originals and then up here, paste attributes. They might be a little too close. They might be a little too close because, of course, these were made for smaller images. And so you can actually go into one of the keyframes and just adjust the first frame more carefully, and it will automatically actually save that new keyframe for you. It's nice to make multiple steps of animatics in this process just to get a feel for how your project is developing. I look forward to seeing yours. Fantastic. You've completed Module 2, and you know what's coming now. We want to see your animatic. I'm so excited to see what you've created and how it's coming together. This is the point where other people should be able to get a really good feel for your story, your characters, and their environment. So share that with us, and I look forward to speaking with you about it in the Discord.